Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Oakville Festival of Film and Arts podcast. My name is Ian Tyson. I was a host of many of the galas at the festival in 2022 and several of the screenings, as well as the awards. Just an honor to be there and be a part of it with everyone that was there. And we're doing some interviews with some filmmakers in podcast form, and it is my pleasure to introduce our guest today, the director of the film featured at the festival this year, The Long Rider, Mr. Sean Cisterna. Sean, welcome.
Thank you, Ian. Yes, can I just say you did a great job at the festival this year? I was at several of the galas, and you were a wonderful moderator.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that very much. It's a lot of fun. It was a great event to be at. So, Sean, The Long Rider I was at the screening at the festival, just an incredible documentary. You would be able to tell this better than I. So why don't you give everybody who maybe didn't see it a quick thumbnail overview of the story of The Long Rider?
Absolutely, yeah. So The Long Rider is the story of Felipe Leite. So when Felipe leaves his adoptive home of Canada, he's an aspiring journalist, and he sets out on this epic quest to ride from Calgary to his family's home in Brazil, and then later beyond, entirely on horseback. And so it was inspired by this 1925 equestrian journey by a gentleman named Ames Shifley, who rode from Buenos Aires, Argentina to the United States in the 20s. And so Felipe's almost 8-year odyssey over 25,000 kilometers across 12 international borders sees this young kid, battle in intense heat, drought, speeding transport trucks, nature's wrath, drug cartels, corrupt border guards, all on his history-making long ride home.
It was just an incredible and truly epic journey to watch throughout the course of the film. Now, just for those who don't know, and I know it's spoken of in the film, what is the definition of a long rider?
A long rider is an individual who rides 1,000 miles or more consecutively in a journey. And so Felipe goes on to explain that in the film that Oscar Wilde is a famous long rider, so is Charles Darwin, so is Marco Polo. So they are these adventurers who set out to ride on horseback these great lengths and kind of explore the world at that very slow pace.
That's amazing. Whoops, my mic muted for a second there. Apologies. How did you, now a lot of the footage, obviously, Felipe filmed himself. So how did you even come to know about Felipe and his journey? Like, how were you introduced to this whole situation?
Yeah, I had a unique into the story. So luckily, I met Felipe in 2005. So we both went to the same high school in Caledon, Ontario, and then a former teacher introduced us. I'm about 10 years older than Felipe is, but I came back to do a guest lecture one day about the film industry, and then young Felipe was in class, and I was introduced to him. So when he set out on this journey in 2005 or 2012, I followed it in real time online, and saw pictures of him one day in Texas, and then he was in Mexico, and then Guatemala. And I was kind of putting the pieces together and reached out to him after his quest, or during his quest, and said, if you make it to Brazil alive, I would love the rights to tell the story. And thankfully,
that's an encouraging statement to make.
Yeah. Thankfully, Felipe had the forethought to record everything. I mean, what makes this project remarkable is that Felipe was alone on his journey for the most part and recorded everything. And it's very difficult to record yourself while being the camera operator. So what happened was, Felipe would ride ahead in a shot, set up a camera and tripod and frame the shot. He would walk back, ride through that shot, then ride back to pick up the camera and kind of continue. So it added many more miles, I guess, to the journey that weren't captured. But wow. That's the way you got to make a film when you're a one-person crew.
Well, and given the, I guess, reality TV world that we live in, it's amazing knowing that detail that he was doing it all himself. Because I know you see those things with, what's that show, Man vs. Wild, where he's supposed to be out there in the elements by himself, but he's got a crew of 10 people with him. So he's not really alone at all.
Right.
but Felipe definitely was. And so was it on social media you were seeing the posts of what he was doing, or
Yeah.
did he have his own site, or?
No, I was following it online, like the way other people might have been doing it. And
Wow.
then I heard that he was also writing for the Toronto Star along the way about his.
Okay.
That's how he helped to fund the his adventures, and his food for himself and his animals was through writing for the Toronto Star. But yeah, I mean that's how I came to learn about the project.
Now, without giving too much away, because you obviously want people to watch the film and see the narrative, but what was kind of I know the book, obviously, that you mentioned was a big influence and a big inspiration for him in his younger life. But what was really the impetus of wanting to do this journey at that time for Felipe?
I guess he grew up with this story, like of Aim Shifley, and was inspired by it. His father read him the book as well. And then Felipe did have some permanent residency issues. His family wasn't allowed to stay in Canada, and by default, that extended to him as well. So if he was not allowed to stay in the country, he was going to get back home his way. If you want to put it that way, that's
Yeah.
a kind of a compelling way. I wouldn't say that's the entire reason why he did it, but
Sure.
certainly was an impetus for him to go on the journey.
It's the shorthand anyway. So he was a resident in Calgary at the time.
In
Living
Ontario.
there?
Yeah.
Oh, he was in Ontario. Why
Yeah.
Calgary then?
He left Calgary to be on top of the heartland of America. It was easier to ride horses along the western U.S. as opposed to the eastern side, dealing with traffic and
yeah, you're not going to find as many people with horses going through like Ohio,
right,
or New York State or things like that. Yeah,
right.
Exactly. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I was wondering about that. Yeah, for some reason I had it in my head that he was a resident. He was living in Calgary at the time, but he obviously went there and then found his horses and did everything else and made his way down. So he's got all this footage. How much footage are we talking about here that you then have to go through?
Yeah, that was the challenging part. I mean, when the hard drives first arrived with all his footage, we kind of assembled it on a computer timeline, editing timeline, and if you hit play, it would take 21 days straight without sleeping to get through all the footage that he shot. So it was about 500 hours of footage that we had to cut down to 90 minutes. And that's multiple films or even TV series with that amount of footage. But it's kind of I blame the pandemic for the project.
Blame or thank?
Blame or thank, yes, because without that time to watch all that footage and to carefully construct it, I don't think we'd have a film today if it weren't for the pandemic. So that's the silver lining that I'll always look back on.
Sure. And I mean, that's talk about daunting, my goodness. But so you literally had to sit down and watch in order all of every second of that footage.
Yeah. And I had a
talk about a binge watch. My God.
Right. But that's the beautiful thing about making a documentary, is that you don't have a script kind of in front of you. You kind of know like a general outline of how the story goes, but to discover the story along the way, it almost felt like I was on the ride with Felipe at the same time. I just had a nice warm coffee while I was enjoying it. He didn't, but to experience the journey from his perspective through all that footage, I made it for a richer experience for me, at least.
Sure, I can only imagine. I mean, and I will say, with the way that he films, and he has a very personable nature and is very open and vulnerable on camera. I know just watching the film, it made me feel like there were the moments when things would be tense or you weren't sure. I was like, oh boy, that's A, speaks to his vulnerability, and B, speaks to the way you're able to assemble this narrative and create it.
Yeah, I think so. And just having 500 hours of footage, like the main thing was, like, I had a map in my office, like with a line from Calgary to Brazil, and if the footage didn't directly propel his journey forward in time, and get from point A to point B, it was kind of superfluous. And those were the moments that we left on the cutting room floor. So we kind of had a philosophy of editing going into the project. Otherwise, we'd just be cutting like a monumental, epic 6-hour film, but we needed some rules in place to make sure that our production, our film ultimately trekked along, and the audience was getting to the exciting bits and maybe just a taste of the other superfluous events that took place along the way. But that was our mentality.
Is that a rule you tend to apply in your filmmaking in general with documentaries, that it's got to be things that are in service of the narrative?
Certainly in the narrative world, like I this is my like first documentary or first
okay.
Or first or second time making a documentary. I don't like them because they are so I don't like going into a film without a plan, right? And documentaries, sometimes when they're shot live, like you never really know when the ending is going to happen. Thankfully, I was working with archival material, and I knew the ending and was able to kind of construct A to B, but and so that's why I kind of dusted off my documentary shirt and kind of went to work as a director on a documentary again.
So now, that being said, you had all this archival footage, you had a lot to work with, you had to cut it down, but you did also still shoot some other things. Maybe talk a little bit about some of the stuff that you chose to shoot to, again, maybe serve that narrative.
Yeah, that's a good question. So a lot of the setup of the story is told through some footage that we shot in Brazil for the film specifically. So that whole explanation of Felipe, young Felipe, falling in love with the story of Aim Shifley. So we hired a young little cowboy, Brazilian cowboy that kind of looked like Felipe, got him on a horse and had him, ride horseback and sit in a field with this book that just kind of lent a more visual angle to Felipe's story rather than cutting to a talking head. I always like to cover up the talking heads as much as possible and let the power of cinema kind of tell the story. That was my philosophy, like why we needed to shoot some extra shots for that. And then we obviously brought Felipe into like a studio setting and did like a very long and lengthy, like 2-day interview with him as well, where he almost stream of consciousness went through his recollection of the events leading up to the journey, like starting on day one, and then he kind of chronicled the events as they unfolded, and that kind of provided a structure for the film as well, almost like a spine where his narration could allow us to cut to what he was talking to.
Well, and I was going to ask about that, and you answered part of the question. I was wondering how long a sit down with Felipe that was to get that narrative. And then if that provided the spine, then where in the process did you do that 2 days of filming of his sort of narration of the ride?
I think that was done first. Yeah.
Okay.
I wanted to hear the journey from his perspective without seeing the footage yet, just to I guess have a visual cue, a visual understanding of the story, and that way I could kind of look for those pieces through the raw footage and kind of construct the story that way.
That's interesting. You let that be sort of your guide, and you hadn't even watched anything yet. Wow.
Yeah. I'd seen some footage along the way. Like I just didn't have watch everything. I think when COVID hit, it was like a panic. I mean, originally this was supposed to be a narrative project. So we have some funding from Telefilm Canada, from Ontario Creates, to do a feature-length movie script of Felipe's story. And that project was, set to shoot in 2020 when things went haywire.
Sure.
So, like, I guess I don't want to say a panic set in, but yeah, a panic set in. We had nothing to do, and like when borders were closed, we couldn't do an international co-production between Canada and Brazil. So that's when Felipe said, I shot all this footage on my journey. Why don't we do a documentary first? So I think we all got excited kind of prematurely and said, yes, let's go film an interview with you, and we'll shoot that first. Then we'll get the footage and kind of construct it around that. So, we did that first interview, and then I saw the footage, and then we went back a few weeks later to grab a different interview, kind of in the same position where we could accentuate the footage that we did have and kind of tell a more cohesive, well-rounded, and philosophical story.
Right. A few little pickup things to patch some holes.
Yes, you got it. Yeah.
Got it. Awesome. So is the narrative, like, scripted project still in the offing, or is that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing with this, even though obviously I love the documentary, I love traveling with it, I'm super proud of it. But when you think of documentaries in the overall, global marketplace, like how many of them truly, I don't know, explode into the stratosphere, right? Like you maybe know Free Solo that won the Oscar a few years ago, the mountain climber. Yeah. But my thinking is that even though like a documentary has its own kind of niche market, it could still be considered a tool to help greenlight the narrative version that we'll eventually make. And yes, the project is well written and it's ready to go, and our producers are doing the budget and schedule for it. It's just a matter of doing our applications in tandem with our Brazilian producers so that we can both kind of fundraise in our respective countries at the time where it's we're aiming to shoot in 2023, in the summer of 2023. So hopefully a year from now we'll be in production on the movie.
Awesome. Now that strikes me, and correct me if I'm wrong, as something that wouldn't be super common, of someone who has directed a documentary subject is then also directing a, I don't want to say fictional, but a movie version of that.
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess, if it was the other way around, like the movie version would have came first. So I've been attached to that for years before the documentary came about. So it's been kind of my project on the go for several years, and I know exactly where we're shooting everything and what each shot looks like. So it's going to be hard to find somebody else, more, I don't know, research to tell the story, I think.
Sure. I mean, and so casting is moving along with that, all of those things?
Yes, casting's underway. We are working with a Brazilian actors, Canadian actors, and US talent as well. So, schedules are always in play, and that's the tricky part. So we don't want to announce anything until everything's kind of signed.
No, of course.
Ready. But yes, it'll be a true international co-production with, and we're going to stay true as much as possible to the real characters as well. So if they're Brazilian, they're from Brazil. If they're Canadian, they're from Canada. And we're going to, adhere to actors have to be comfortable around horses as well. So sure. It'll have to be a real, they can't just act. They need to do multiple things. They need to speak a bit of Portuguese. They need to know how to ride horses. So it'll be a complicated and challenging role for any performer who wants to come on board this project.
So my question then, I guess, in the differential between the documentary and the feature film, is there something you're excited about that from your conversations with Felipe happened along the ride that maybe wasn't captured on camera that you can do narratively in the feature film?
Oh yeah, I think that there are moments that are in the feature version that we simply didn't have the footage to justify putting in the documentary. So that's what makes the feature version exciting for us, because we've lived so long with the documentary over the last couple of years that we're essentially telling the same story but with different pieces, and I think it'll give the audience a more richer understanding of Felipe's journey and the characters he met along the way. And it's just and in a more cinematic way. No disrespect to Felipe's footage, because I think it's gorgeous and he did an amazing job, but to be able to incorporate like movement of the camera in the shots and photograph these large expansive vistas was just something that Felipe didn't have time to do on his actual journey.
Absolutely. I look forward to that project. And just from a personal standpoint, if Sam Elliott doesn't show up as a rancher somewhere along the way that he bumps into, then maybe there's been a disservice done. I don't know.
Got it. Well, what's interesting is that Interestingly enough, Felipe was one of the parade marshals at this year's Calgary Stampede, and last week he rode through Calgary alongside Kevin Costner. So
Amazing. Yes, I said and he was in his full Yellowstone sheriff regalia or marshal regalia. It was great. It was awesome.
got it. You got it. So we're hoping that as Kevin learns a bit more about our project, maybe he'll sign on to lend his name or be a cameo in the film as well.
Yeah, one of the people that maybe helps Felipe out with a horse along the way when he needs a sort of someone to, a horse to sub in for a little while or a place to stay. That'd be great. Maybe he stops in Yellowstone. I mean, hey, you could cross worlds. It's part of the Lone Rider cinematic universe now.
Ian, we got to get you on set to help negotiate that. But
that's right. Yeah, I'll negotiate that. Well, it was funny because I did see the pictures out of the Stampede. A lot of people posting pictures that I know in Calgary of Kevin Costner. And I kept looking. I'm like, I know Felipe's there somewhere because you had mentioned that at the festival.
Yeah.
And, so I knew he was there. But that was so that's very cool. Now, there was also the other rides that happened after he finished the journey to Brazil. Where were those in the process as well? Were those done before you got your hands on everything as well, or did those happen after the fact?
The after Felipe made it to Brazil, he then rode a year and a half later from Brazil to the southernmost tip of Argentina, a city called Ushuaia. And so that was another year and a half journey that's featured in the documentary. Although we didn't want to tell that in the same way as Felipe did getting from Canada to Brazil, we kind of shift perspectives a little bit. And when you see the film, you'll see that a new narrator takes over that kind of guides us as to, we may be initially confused, but a couple minutes later, we realize who the voice is. And then there was a third ride from the Alaska back to Calgary where it all started, and that was in 2019. And so each journey is distinctly different and unique, and he had different challenges in each of the journeys to overcome. And even though they're they only are reflected in our documentary for a few minutes, kind of like an epilogue, those two will also be, if all goes well, those will be their own individual movies as well. So
I was just going to say, I smell a trilogy, Sean. I smell a trilogy.
That's a rare thing in Canada, but that'll be our.
It'd be something to watch, and I can imagine on the casting side, just having seen the film and seeing the vulnerability, the emotion that Felipe brings into things, that's going to be a challenge. Finding someone to portray this just so open and in touch with his emotions, and on this journey, it's just so raw. It's wonderful.
Yeah, that's the exciting thing about offering this to an actor, is that they get to do a bit of everything. It's got romance, drama, adventure, multiple languages and travel. So it's got so many things for an actor to sink their teeth into that I can't see why it wouldn't be a very desirable project for someone to attach themselves to.
Well, I can't wait to see it when it comes out. Having seen this film, it's just, and I know it's a rare thing. The only thing I can think of recently in, film or pop culture or what have you is, there was the Netflix, The Staircase documentary that then turned into a, fictionalized version of that on HBO. So,
sure. Yep.
Yep. Absolutely. So this is it's going to be really interesting to knowing the source material and then watching it come out in a feature film. I'm excited. So maybe you can tell us first with Felipe and then with yourself, what's happening with Felipe now? What's he up to? What's happening?
I think since our Oakville festival, we've gotten into several more that'll keep us busy throughout the summer and fall. So next we're heading to Woods Hole Film Festival. That's in Massachusetts, in the Cape Cod area. We've been invited to festivals in Colorado, Florida, Spain, Italy. So the Long Rider is definitely going to be riding a lot more over the next several months. But no, Felipe is he is doing some writing. He's writing his third book that tells that story from Alaska to Calgary. I don't know if you remember that that time in the Yukon where those two killers were on the loose, and that was happening at the exact same time as Felipe was traveling through the Yukon. So it was a very stressful part of the journey back to Calgary from Alaska, to have two serial killers on the run, like in the exact same place as you're riding. So there's a lot of drama in that book that he's kind of
adds an extra element.
Yeah.
And what about for yourself? What else? I mean, you've got the festivals happening, and then is it just all pre-production on the feature film?
It is, yeah. So we're actively working with our Brazilian partners to try to identify locations and whatnot. So we have the most compelling package possible when it comes to pitching, streamers and broadcasters when it comes time. And we're just assembling the package now. And then, I have another feature shooting in the fall, comedy called 6 Months that we're pretty excited about.
Awesome. And where can people find you, follow you, find some of your other work?
Oh, sure. I'm on all the social platforms. So if you want, it's at Sean Cisterna, just the way my name is spelled, no periods or anything. At Sean Cisterna on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, wherever you want. And as you can check out IMDb for all my credits, and I have a link tree to links to all my films as well.
Awesome. Well, amazing to chat with you about this. Just incredible emotional journey of a film that I just thoroughly enjoyed. Can't wait to see the feature film version. Thank you for A, being a part of the Oakville Film Festival, and B, being a part of this podcast to chat and give us a lot more in-depth information. I thank you so very much for your time today. It's appreciated.
Awesome, Ian. Thank you very much. You're a great interviewer.
Well, I appreciate that. And we will see everyone soon next time on the Oakville Film Festival podcast. Thank you so much.